Welcome back, folks, to Muck You, where we cut through the noise and dig into the truth. No sugarcoating, no spin. It's the raw, unfiltered conversations that matter to you. I'm David Wheeler, and as always, joined by my co-host, the one and only Mo David.
Hey, thanks, David. It's great to be here. Great to be back. We've had a number of interesting guests on, and today is no exception. I guess out of the 8 or 10 shows that we've done, I'm really always pleased when we have a veteran on, and particularly if it's an Air Force veteran. So I think this is the third time we've had Denver Riggleman on, who served in the Air Force. We had Adam Kinzinger on, and today we've got retired Colonel Terry Virts, who, oftentimes I feel like I accomplished a lot in my lifetime, and then I see a bio like his, and I feel like such a slacker. He's an Air Force Academy graduate, like I said, a retired Air Force colonel, former F-16 pilot, then had a distinguished career with NASA. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records. He's an author. He's a motivational speaker. Just a really interesting bio. And Terry, we're really pleased to have you on today. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I liked your background, by the way. We saw it on video, and I saw some Air Force patches on the wall.
Oh, yeah, well, thanks. I wish I was young enough to do it again. I really enjoyed it, and still, I've been retired since 2008, but I still miss it. But so, how did you end up? What got you into the military and off to the Air Force Academy?
That's a great question. When I was a kid, I was an exchange student. I lived in Finland with a Finnish family, and I lived about a kilometer from the Soviet Union. This was back in the 80s when, no kidding, USSR. And I was really fascinated by this giant evil empire. And, 1984, this was in 1984, and the book 1984 really struck a chord with me. And I was just amazed at the Europeans, defending themselves from this evil empire and World War II history. And so basically I went to the Air Force Academy when I was 17 to defend Europe from Russia. That was kind of my worldview at the time. And it's ironic that now, 40 years later, Russia's back. They just don't change, and it's the same story.
Yeah, they're our new best friends now. I guess are our new allies. So,
oh my God, yeah, that's actually terrifying. It makes me sick to my stomach. So, I flew into space with Russians. I speak Russian. I spent over a decade there, traveling back and forth there, and have a lot of Russian friends. One of my very good close neighbors was Russian, and now they're an American citizen as of yesterday.
Great.
Yeah. So I love a lot of Russian people and food and culture and everything. It's just the government has been, in my humble opinion, the main source of human misery on planet Earth for the last century. I mean, they have been between making themselves miserable with the Soviet Union, between making other countries miserable with, Estonia and Latvia and Poland and Ukraine more than anybody. They just bring misery everywhere they go. For my whole career in the Air Force, and I'm sure for yours too, we trained against MiG-29s and SA-6s, all these Russian airplanes and missiles. They basically arm all the bad guys on Earth. So if you're like on the side of Russia, you're probably on the wrong side of.
It is ironic because I'm sure you've done the same. Spent hours in chemical warfare gear, training to fight Russia.
Mach 4.
Or I was at 19th Air Force. The ballistic missiles where 24/7, 365. We've got crews sitting there just waiting for hopefully the time never comes, but to turn the key and hit the button, and suddenly for them to be our supposed best friend rather than our adversary is just incomprehensible.
Yeah. It's not in America's interest. It's not in anybody's interest. I'm actually watching Band of Brothers. I don't know if you guys like that. It's one of my favorite shows. I think the most meaningful moment in my Air Force career was I led a 4-ship of F-16s in a flyby over Normandy, the American military cemetery there, on June 6th. And back in the 90s, it was on the anniversary of D-Day, missing man formation. It was just I've gotten to do some really cool things. And that was the most meaningful of everything I got to do, just to kind of honor the men that died there, defending our friends and allies and weaker partners from a much larger dictator that was, bringing evil. And America used to do that. And I think we're going to do it again. We're having a really bad moment right now, but it's not going to last forever.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm hopeful that we're going to get through this rough patch and get back to being the country that we ought to be. But boy,
Yeah.
it's scary times we're living in right now.
Yeah.
You mentioned you mentioned F-16s. I looking through your bio, I saw you were at Homestead when
Mhm.
Hurricane Andrew rolled through and had to relocate up to Moody. It's
I
interesting.
did.
My first assignment, I'm about a decade ahead of you, age
Mhm.
wise. And my first assignment was at Patrick Air Force Base, and I bought a house there from a captain that was PCSing out. And
Right.
he ended up going to the Philippines, and he was there back in June of 1991 when Mount Pinatubo erupted.
The hurricane or the volcano. Yeah. Oh,
And he
man.
got out of there with just, the clothes on his back. And then, the
Right.
assignment folks said, it's not going to reopen. Where would you like to go? And he said, I used to be stationed in Florida. I really liked it there. So I said,
Oh
okay,
no.
how
He went
about
to Homestead.
he went to
Oh,
Homestead. And so in August of 92, the second time in about 15 months, everything he had was lost again. So I've always made it a point to see where he was stationed and made sure I didn't go there.
his call sign was Lucky for sure. I had heard of him. He was legendary. Like I think there was more, maybe more than one, but I remember absolutely like the Pinatubo guys were like, oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
All my bases from that time frame got shut down. Like I went to pilot training at Willie. The fighter lead-in left Holloman. The F-16s left MacDill. Homestead got shut. So everywhere I went, the base got shut down. So nobody wanted me to move to their base.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife and I got orders to go to Columbus Air Force Base as
Oh yeah.
the senior attorney there. And I called my wife to tell her, and she said, "I thought Wright-Patterson was in Dayton." And I said, "No, no, not Columbus, Ohio, Columbus, Mississippi."
Yeah.
And
By the sea.
and she cried. But I think I think if you ask her now, the best assignment, the most fun assignment we ever had was at that UPT base where it was
When
just it was
when were you there?
I was there from, God, that would have been like around 90, like 87 to 90.
Okay, so you were there before Doc Fogelsong was the wing commander. You
No,
had a.
actually, I worked for him for about a week.
Do
He
you
was,
remember some F-16 guys getting in trouble there?
yeah. I'm trying to think of,
It
Mo
it might
probably
have been after you
prosecuted
left.
him.
I've been in trouble many times in my Air Force career. We were doing a vertical takeoffs. We were four F-16s. We were going on our way to Andrews for just a cross country, and I was number four. And we got to the end of the runway, pulled straight up, and it was pretty cool doing vertical takeoff at pilot training base. I thought
yeah,
It's gone. It's gone.
you went
yeah,
dead.
Go ahead,
All
Terry.
right. So we're talking about Columbus Air Force Base, and
yeah,
you're talking about doing the four ship and the vertical takeoff.
yeah. So I was a new lieutenant, and we were on our way to Andrews. And we decided to do a vertical takeoff because it's a weekend, it's pilot training. I'm sure these poor lieutenant, the other pilot training students would love to see this. So, and I was the number four guy. So number one takes off, goes straight up. Number two takes off. And you go straight up to, I don't know, maybe 10,000 feet and then level off. And as I was going straight up, I rolled the jet. So I'm going vertical and I rolled the jet and we go on to Andrews. And we get to Andrews, there's a yellow sticky, hey, call your home base. And we called home and the colonel was yelled at us. And then we had to fly back and the whole squadron came in on a Sunday and basically for them to chew our ass out. And it was because of me. And my commander calls me in, is like, do you want a lawyer? Blah. And I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? I was going vertical and I rolled the jet. And he was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. So the wing commander there at Columbus was not happy. It was like in Top Gun, those guys showboating. And I'm like, it's not, I'm going vertical. So there's no like acrobatics. I'm already going 90 degrees straight up. So what's wrong with rolling the jet? So that I didn't really see a problem with it, but the colonel thought differently. The
Yeah,
good news
really.
is, well, I was going to say real quick. So I got in trouble. They made me go grade landings. I had to go stand by the runway and like grade people's landings. That's my punishment. But that week, we had a Dutch exchange officer and anyway, we were doing this thing to see how fast we could come up initial, which is like the traffic pattern before you land. And everybody wanted the triple nickel club. So we were trying to go 555 knots, which is really fast up initial, just like the scene in Top Gun where the captain spills his coffee. And then that wasn't fast enough. So then it was the Satan Club. So you were trying to go 666 knots. Anyway, finally, this Dutch guy got in trouble. The colonel saw it. And so as soon as he was in trouble, I wasn't in trouble anymore. So the career lesson that I learned was it doesn't matter if you do something wrong You just don't want to be the most recent person to have done something.
All right. Yeah, I really enjoyed Columbus. My family had a little airport here in North Carolina, so I started flying when I was 15.
Oh,
But
wow.
ended up in the JAG Corps. But my last day at Columbus, the wing commander said, "Come on, let's go flying." And so we took up a T-38. It's the only thing I ever got to fly. You could point straight up, and it would get. I mean, you do that in a Cessna, and at some point
For a few seconds, you can do
you
it.
stall out. But so from the Air Force, you went over to NASA. What prompted that?
I wanted to do it ever since I was a little kid. Like I grew up. The first book I ever read was about Apollo when I was in kindergarten. I had posters of the space shuttle and an F-16, the old red, white, and blue YF-16, and galaxies. It's just what I wanted to do my whole life. So I read a book called The Right Stuff when I was a teenager. Great book. Actually, I just gave it to my friend who just became an American citizen. I gave her some great American books, and that was one of them. And Travels with Charlie, a John Steinbeck book, which is a spectacular book. I gave her that. But yeah, so it's something I wanted to do ever since I was a little kid.
Okay, cool. So we'll edit this out, Terry. Sorry,
That's all right.
Usually Mo dominates these conversations so badly that I take a nap. So, so Terry, you've been in space, you've been in the military. Why is it that Air Force guys are such badass?
Well, we're smarter than the Army and Navy guys and better looking and more humble. But no, I don't know. I was lucky. I was very lucky. I mean, I'm the rare guy that got to do what I wanted to do when I was a little boy. I'm very fortunate. Yeah, I could say, I worked hard, but a lot of people worked hard. I was lucky when I got picked by NASA. Excuse me. So, but I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. And there's a message that I tell folks, and kind of my motivational, inspirational message is don't tell yourself no. So if there's some dream you want, don't tell yourself no. If it's a big dream, you're going to have to work hard. It won't be easy. But that first step, the most important step, I think, is that throwing your hat in the ring and going for it. So don't tell yourself no. That's my advice.
Okay, so let's apply that to this conversation. What are you dreaming about these days?
Well, I'm dreaming about a time when America, resists our enemies and helps our friends rather than the opposite. So that's kind of my goal. When I was in space, you look back and it's a beautiful planet. It really is. And it's just gorgeous. And you can't even imagine. You cannot imagine. I'm doing a photography exhibit right now in Asia, or I'm sorry, in Europe. It's in Graz, Austria right now. It's going to go in different places. And the guy that did it with a lot of my space photography, it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I mean, it is amazing. The prints that he did, he really did a great job. So when you go through this thing, you're like, man, Earth is beautiful. It really is. Except, well, there's a couple things that I took away. First of all, that thin blue line, when you look at our atmosphere, it is thin. It is really thin. And we have planet A and there's no planet B. So it's like, wow. It is a pretty planet, but we need to take care of it. And the other thing is people say astronauts don't see borders. If we could just send people into space, they could hold hands and sing Kumbaya and everything would be great. No, that's not true. First of all, if you're an empathetic person and your mind is open, then yes, you're going to be profoundly impacted by space. But we all probably could think of a few leaders these days who don't really have open, empathetic minds. And the other thing is when you look back at Earth, you do see some borders, not a lot, but North Korea, South Korea is the most stark one. It's just insane. Google a picture of that at night. South Korea is thriving. It's brilliant white everywhere, city lights, and North Korea is just a black hole. The other thing that you see, when you look in Africa, there's no city lights. And so you can kind of see politics and corruption. And I never expected to see politics on Earth, but you can see them through the city lights that you see, which is something I was completely not expecting to see. But, that's what I saw.
Really a view that very few people have probably thought, Colonel. So you mentioned a word important to me. My father was a Marine, so maybe I should defend the Marines on your
I love
derogatory comments a little bit ago. But
no, just Army and Navy. I love the Marines. My first
okay, all right,
the shuttle was we can bash the Army and the Navy.
Okay, good. I'll remember that. So, my father he was in the Marines during Korea, but somehow, he grew up in a really small town in the middle of Iowa, and they were so poor he had to go away from their home on the summers and work because they couldn't afford to feed in his house. But somehow he became a Democrat and a big Democrat. I mean, like, the fucking Republicans, that, and I think that's through a lived experience. How did how do you view politics these days? As a former Air Force NASA guy living in Texas, where do you see politics?
I tried not to, but jokingly, but I actually I follow it extremely closely. Somebody just sent me this old Simpsons from 30 years ago, and it was like, man, the Simpsons nailed this 30 years ago. It was the Republican convention, and their signs were like, "We'll do everything that's bad for you, and we're evil." That was the Republican convention. And then the Democrat convention across the street was, "We suck and we can't govern." So it was kind of funny, and I love the Simpsons, but when you look at American politics, I tell you what, from a foreigner's perspective, because I do a lot of traveling, they're just aghast. Like they can't believe what they're seeing happening in American politics. And I don't think this is what Americans want. I mean, clearly Americans in 2024 didn't vote for more higher egg prices, which is what we're getting. They didn't vote for their 401ks to get clobbered, which is what's happening. They didn't vote to join Team Putin and join the Kremlin to attack our ally. And so I think we're getting things, maybe a little bit of buyer's remorse there. But here's something that's really awful. This is terrible, but it is what it is. As you know, former government folks, there's a lot of senior political appointees. I think there's 1,000 or maybe 2,000. There's lots and lots of senior government officials that come in. They kind of run the government. All of them, 100% of them, and 100% of the cabinet, all of the top leaders in the American government got their job by line. They all had to pass this egregious 20, 25-minute loyalty test, which is like something out of the Politburo or something. They had to lie. They had to say, Trump won the 2020 election, and they had to go on and on about all this other stuff that's just absolutely egregious. So when you build a house on a bad foundation and a storm comes, that house is not going to stand. And right now, unfortunately, the executive branch of our government is built on a foundation of lies. So that's not, I don't care what party you are. I don't care about what party. I just care about, I'm an American first. I'm a Texan second. I care about doing the right thing for Texans and for Americans. And it makes me sick to my stomach seeing some of the stuff that's happening now.
I don't know how it was during your military career, but during mine, politics, the folks I worked with, I rarely knew if they were a Democrat or Republican. It just wasn't an issue. The military really prided itself on being nonpartisan, and I served under both Democratic and Republican presidents, and I never doubted. I mean, I disagreed with them on policy, but I never doubted they had my back. And I just don't get that feeling with the current commander in chief and the current Secretary of Defense and what seems like the politicization of the military. So I was always a big advocate to young folks. I was on the faculty at Howard University at the law school, and I encouraged a lot of my students to consider a military career. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I'd do that now under the current administration. I'm just curious on your thoughts about where we are today with the military.
How terrible is that to say? I mean, isn't that the worst thing that you've ever said? Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying, my daughter is on a Fulbright scholarship right now, which is like that's a big deal in the foreign service universe and the State Department. And they just got a email warning that program might be canceled and all this stuff might be canceled. And basically none of her friends want to work for the government. And that's terrible, man. The government is important. Our government is really good. We just had this swearing-in ceremony yesterday. Thousands of people just became Americans here in Houston yesterday morning. There's a reason why all these people want to come to America, because we have a great country. I mean, it's a pretty good country. And part of that reason is we have a great government. And we have things like the rule of law, and like you and I can do a business deal, and we know that we're probably going to implement what we say we're going to do, and if we don't, there's ways to do it. We have roads that work. We have a military that keeps us safe. America has worked in the past very well, and I think just destroying it with a wrecking ball is a bad idea. Should it be tweaked? Yes. Oh my God, the government is, could absolutely be improved. Of course, it's an ugly sausage factory, but it needs to be tweaked, not destroyed. And that's unfortunately, I think what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I know I worked for Congress for a little over a year, and then I ran for Congress. And both times, I'm a big advocate for procurement reform. I mean,
Yeah,
we waste so
absolutely.
much money
Hmm.
that you never run a business the way we run the government. But like you said, it needs a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, to make those corrections. And it really bothers me too. I was a judge at the Department of Labor when I retired, and whether it's the military or the federal civil service, I mean, you would occasionally run into somebody that shouldn't have been there. But that was the exception and not the rule. I mean, the
Right.
vast majority of folks are there for the right reason. They're not getting rich, and they're doing something because they believe it matters. And
Yeah.
to see them demonized and demoralized, and you got to send Elon the 5 things you did last week is really just disappointing.
It's disappointing, but it's also very damaging. I mean, the damage that Elon is doing to our government, and by the way, the government is important, and it's kind of funny if you look at tax dollars in and tax dollars out by state. Red states get by far the most tax dollar. The government's a pretty good investment for them because a lot more dollars go into red states as a whole than blue states, and yet it's being demonized and jobs are lost. I think there's going to be a lot of buyer's remorse, frankly, I hate to purely political here, but I think the 26 midterms is going to be, there's going to be a lot of backlash. And the one thing that Americans want is checks and balances. Like the founding fathers set up our government that you have to have checks and balances because they know human nature and they know that people want to be a king. And we see this in a leader that wants to be a king here in America. And that's not what America is. And so that's why we have a legislature and a judicial and an executive branch. Right now, we don't have that. There are no checks and balances. The courts have some checks and balances, not what we want. I think the American people would much rather see the president of one party and the Congress of another party. So I think there's going to be a blue wave in 26. We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking. You mentioned we're talking about Elon Musk. You were the pilot of the shuttle Endeavour. You're the commander of the International Space Station, so you certainly have a unique perspective on the space program. It seems like NASA is kind of being pushed to the side a bit, and more privatization of space. I'm just curious how you feel about that. Is that the right approach?
I mean, there's always been private companies, back in the 60s, Rockwell and Boeing, Grumman built, the Apollo component. So there's always been private companies with boards of directors and share prices and all that have been building NASA hardware for a long time. The approach now is much more hands off, where NASA just, here's some money, go build us something. And by the way, Elon has gotten, I've seen numbers well north of $30 billion in government money and tax subsidies between direct contracts and other subsidies. So that's always been the case, but NASA's going a lot more hands off. And frankly, I'm from the FAA and we're here to help was our joke. And when I was a pilot, you would rather have less government than more, I think, when it comes to a lot of things. And so American innovation is amazing. I mean, what SpaceX is doing with this big giant Starship rocket is amazing. That's a impressive rocket. The Falcon 9 dominates all global launch. I mean, the Falcon 9 has basically put every other company and country almost out of business when it comes to launch. So, SpaceX is clearly executing in some ways, but I think that you need the right balance. It's called a public-private partner. If the government does what it's good at, private sector is good at do what it does. I think that's a good balance, but you need a balance, and especially when humans are involved. If you're just launching satellites and it blows up, that's fine. Once humans get involved, you need some adult supervision, and you don't want the Elon's 20-year-old interns running things the way they're running the federal government.
I mentioned earlier, my first assignment was at Patrick Air Force Base, and I was there when Challenger exploded. The launches had gotten so routine that it just happened that day. I don't know if you recall, it was weather. There was an issue in the morning. It got pushed back a bit. And the only reason I saw it happen was it was around lunchtime. A group of us were walking over to the officers club for lunch when Challenger launched. And, we stopped to look at it. And my initial thought was, boy, the boosters separated awful low. And then, just took a few seconds to realize that something catastrophic had happened. But, they were launching like one a month, and it becomes so routine that people kind of took it for granted until that day. And it really drove home how important it is, safety. And I guess, looking back on the things that were missed during that mishap that could have prevented it. You're right. You put human beings in the equation and it's a different story.
Yeah, I teach a case study. I call it Why Organizations Fail at Harvard Business School. And I just did it for a big company here in Houston last week. And it's about Challenger and also Columbia. And it's kind of frightening how similar both of those space shuttle accidents were. They're basically the same accident, different. One was an O-ring and one was foam. So technically it was different, but the leadership failures and management failures and all that stuff was exactly the same. So the point, well, there's many points. It's a long, involved case study. It's a great case study, but it's one thing to learn a lesson, and it's another to remember the lesson. And that's true probably, in our personal lives, but it's certainly true when it comes to business and technical things. Like the global financial, we all learn that you shouldn't be too big to fail. Well, is Bank of America too big to fail? Is, Wells Fargo or Chase or any of those too big to fail? So, humans are good at learning lessons. We're not good at remembering them.
Yeah. Yeah, I participated in a couple of aircraft accident investigations. It seems like in every one that, when you put all the pieces together, if any one thing had gone differently, it would have been a non-event.
Yep.
It was just that string of things that just happened to align and led to catastrophe.
Yeah. We used to call it the safety chain. Do you remember hearing that?
Yeah.
If you look at an accident like a chain, all the links have to be in place in order, from start to finish, in order for the chain to hold. And same thing in an accident. All these things have to happen for the accident to happen. If you break any of those links, the chain falls apart. And if you stop, there's a lot of different opportunities to stop accidents. Airplanes rarely just explode out of the blue with no warning. Like there's almost always something that could have been done.
All right. Well, listen, I know you circled the globe, 3,600 times, but you're in the Guinness Book of World Records for circling it one.
That's true. Yeah.
So can you tell folks a little bit about that one trip around that got you in the Guinness Book of World Records?
Yeah, so a good friend of mine named Hamish Harding, who unfortunately you may know his name. He was one of the passengers on board that Titan sub that went down with the Titanic. Yeah. So anyway, he had this dream, this crazy idea he wanted to do it in honor of Apollo to set a world record going around the Earth. He was a pilot. He had some other, records, and so he liked setting aviation records. So originally we were going to take an Apollo astronaut and I was going to fly, and then that didn't happen and we had to wait a year. And then anyway, so I ended up making a documentary about it and it's called One More Orbit. It was my first movie that I directed. And it was cool. We took off and landed from the Kennedy Space Center. We went over the North Pole and South Pole. So we set the world record for circumnavigation over the poles. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. We had to stop 3 times for gas. We stopped in Kazakhstan, Mauritius, and Patagonia, South America. And it was a really fun experience. It was about 44 hours, so almost 2 days in that airplane. It was in a business jet, so that's kind of cool. It's fancy, but not really. I mean, you don't want to spend 48 hours in the cabin, and it was a bunch of people, and so yes, it was a business jet, but it was also, it was quite an adventure. It was a lot of fun. And flying over Antarctica, the most dangerous part by far, because there's no divert. It was the July, which means it's wintertime in Antarctica. So, I mean, we were like really low on gas. The air, it got below the limit, air temperature limit of the airplane. It was an exciting 44 hours.
So you've got some leadership chop. Have you ever thought about running for political office now that you conquered space and conquered Earth?
It's funny. I get asked that question all the time. Whenever I do my space talk, you will do Q&A and, how do you go to the bathroom in space and are there aliens and all the standard questions. And someone always goes, when are you running for office? So yes, I've been thinking about it. When I was in middle school in 8th grade, they said, what do you want to do when you grow up? So we went around, and when they came to me, I said, I want to be Secretary of State. So it's something I've had in my mind. So we'll see what the future holds. But, honestly, running for office, just awful. I've had friends who've done it. Obviously, Senator Mark Kelly is a friend of mine. When I was commander of the space station, his brother was on my crew. God, I think Mo, you said you ran for office. Is that true?
Yeah, I ran for Congress back in 2020.
Oh, wow.
got defeated by Madison Cawthorn. If you remember him, he was
Oh, God, I wish I would have known you. I would have emptied my savings account to, well, not empty. The limit's 3,500. It was probably 3,000 back then, but whatever.
Right.
But you have to spend. Here's what my friends, first of all, everybody says mean stuff about you. And in the Air Force, we had a rule it had to be 10% true. If you were telling a story about somebody, there's lies about you, there's your skeletons come out. It's just, that's no fun. And you spend, I've been told 6 to 9 hours a day on the phone asking for money, which is like, I can't imagine anything worse. So, and it's just constant. And especially, some for congressional races, you normally need millions of dollars to unseat, especially an incumbent, a lot of money. But if it's a Senate race, like in Texas, that's $100 million race. So it sounds like not a lot of fun between getting yelled at and spending all your time on the phone but at the end of the day, we have to have good leaders because the US government matters. I mean, we're seeing that right now. It's only been a few weeks and there's been a lot of bad things are happening just to normal Americans. Not the billionaires are great. They're loving things, but like the average car mechanic or hairdresser, man, it's been a rough couple weeks. So we need to have good people in office who don't have to lie to get their job.
So what are you looking at? I mean, Texas is a tough state for, I think, anybody to get elected because it's very competitive on the Republican side, and Democrats have been redistricted out and gerrymandered out and all that crap. How do you run from Texas, and what race do you think you'd look at?
Well, I don't want to speculate too much, but I mean, it's funny. I used to say I need to run for Congress when I get out of the Air Force, and then like the more I knew, the more older I got, the more experience I had. I'm like, I don't need to run for Congress. I need to run for Senate. And then seeing things the last few years, I'm like, I need to run for president. So, but running in Texas is tough. A lot of states gerrymander, as you know, and Republicans and Democrats both do it, but Republicans do it more than Democrats. So even though you look at the House and it's 50-50 roughly, but unfortunately it's 50 hyper-partisan Republicans and 50 partisan Democrats. And it's because of the partisan primary system we have, especially in House races, leads to the most extreme in order to win the primary, you have to be an extreme person, which is not good. So even though it's 50-50, it's much more partisan than, say, in 30 years ago when it was, 60-40 or 70-30. It was they would still work across the aisle.
Well, yeah, Texas, and Texas had a long history of being Democratic.
It was all Democratic.
Yeah, when I was in the Young Dem National Committee, populated with Democrats, and we'd have conventions down there, and those days are long gone.
Yeah, I'm reading a biography, Max Boot's biography of Reagan, and I stuffed envelopes for Ronald Reagan when I was in high school. The Southern strategy, the Republican strategy to take over the South, which was really, to be blunt, it was a racist strategy, but it worked. The South it went from all Democrat to all Republican now. But we have 38 House seats here in Texas. 2 of them in the last election, 2 out of 38 were decided by less than 10 points. So there were no there's maybe one, or if you call 10 points, most people call 10 points getting your butt kicked. So, there's 2 of the 38 are competitive, which means that 36 of 38 have to appeal to the partisan base. So we have a lot of extremist congressmen here in Texas, which is not cool. And we have John Cornyn in the Senate, and his reputation, he's a grandfather and he's very bipartisan, and he's, a nice guy, and he works across the aisle. He's just a Trump rubber. I mean, there are no more, or there's very few. Don Bacon's an exception. There are some exceptions, but there's almost no exception. Republicans who are anything other than rubber stamps. And that's just not healthy for America. America wants and needs checks and balances, and we don't have that right now.
Over to Mo, do you got another one?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry, I didn't see your note. So obviously, you're not throwing in the towel. You're still hopeful that the pendulum is going to swing back in the other direction. What do you think we need to be doing? Folks that want to see a return to sanity.
Yeah.
What do we need to be doing to try to obviously, I think some folks on the other side are just, there's nothing you can do to penetrate that bubble they live in. But what do we do to try to reach out to those folks in the middle that might be, open to reason?
Well, that's the key. And unfortunately, right now, the Republican Party is not a functioning party, it's a cult. A party has debates, cults have witch hunts, and so that the Republican Party is gone, at least for now. That's not healthy. America needs at least two, if not more, healthy political parties. And right now, the Democrats are the only one. And I've been talking to a lot of Democrats, and I've been so encouraged because they all realize and they all really want to grow their party and to be open tent. In the past, they didn't. In the past, they were very, you had to toe the line on all these progressive positions. And I think Democrats have realized that, America just voted. They don't like illegal immigration. They don't want millions of people pouring across the border, and I don't either. America just voted. They don't want an emphasis on DEI. They just don't. They want policies that are good for all Americans. And so I think the Democrats are opening up their eyes to this, and all the ones that I've talked to are, even the progressive ones, and God bless them. I love them, but the party I think is going to grow and welcome those moderates that are, that they don't really like Trump, but they just couldn't stomach all those illegals pouring across the border. And frankly, I didn't like it. I hated that. I'm in here in Texas. We have lots of immigrants, obviously, here in Texas. Well, everybody in Texas is an immigrant of some kind. Even the Native Americans here thousands of years ago came across the Bering Sea from Russia, right? So everybody came here from somewhere, but it just needs to be done legally, I think, illegally. And the vast majority of
So if you were to run, you would run as a Democrat, independent, liberal Democrat,
I
or
think
liberal conservative?
I don't know. I hate labels. And I just read a book last year called The Myth of Left and Right. And it just like when you say conservative and, brands you a rhino Republican, well, he's actually the most Republican in name only. And I mean, there's nothing about his policies that are traditional free trade. Are you kidding me? He's destroying the global economy and ruining all of our long-term friendships with our allies. Stand up to Russia. He's on the side of Russia. I mean, that kills me to say that, but it's the truth. He's literally on the side of Russia. Small government. He had the biggest ever debt of any president ever. So there's nothing Republican or traditional about him. So I don't like to use the labels just because they change. It's more about tribe than it is about any one particular policy.
Well, tell folks where they can learn a little bit more about you. Let's plug your book.
Sure.
And
yeah, sure. So I have a website. It's just terryvirts.com. You can follow me on social media. I'm Astro Terry on Instagram and Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm trying to use Blue Sky. I love Blue Sky, actually. I don't spend very much time on social media, but I can't doom scroll on Twitter. It's the hate channel. So Elon has really ruined it. So Blue Sky's a great app. Instagram. So yeah, terryvirts.com. And I do speaking and executive coaching and that kind of stuff.
Well, that's terrific. And so what's given you hope? Mo likes to talk about hope at the end of conversations. And
I love young people. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm kind of the doom and gloom guy, and most the hope and change guy. What do you see out there that gives you hope?
Well, I'm a realist. I mean, there's some really bad stuff happening, and I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and say everything's perfect. We need to fight against this stuff that's going on. But I love young people. Like I said, my daughter is on a Fulbright program. Man, there are some smart 20-somethings out there that are really smart, and they really want good things for the world. That I think the future is bright. I had a chance to do a couple of Air Force speeches at dining inns, and I did an F-35 graduation talk recently. And man, there's some pretty good 23, 24-year-old lieutenants that are flying F-35, which is a pretty good airplane. So I'm very hopeful about that. I think Lockheed's sales are going to crater if we continue to crush our allies around the world. No one's going to want to buy American products. So Lockheed and Boeing ought to start lobbying the administration to kind of zip it when it comes to bashing friends. But I'm very hopeful that these young people, there are some good, and old people like us, the old crusty men. These young people, they don't know anything. Back when we were kids, back when I was a kid, I was like a knuckle dragging and I didn't know anything. And these kids are like super smart. So I'm hopeful for the
terrific way for you here. And Colonel, we really appreciate your time and insight and also your service to our country. A lot of risk involved when you were in those aircraft and on the shuttles. So we appreciate that. and also helping us understand what really matters. I mean, your view of from space of the Earth, I'm sure, has given you an interesting view of the world and life. So we really appreciate you taking some time. And Mo, I want to head back to you for one more thing. Could you do us a favor and tell us about your book and where folks could get your book really quickly?
Sure. You have a historical novel called Sovereign Oak. It's based on events that took place from where I'm standing right now, historical events that led to the development of Western North Carolina. And 100% of the proceeds are going to Hurricane Helene relief. So you can find it on Amazon.com.
And okay, so that's Sovereign Oak on Amazon.com, folks. And if this conversation made you think or gave you a new perspective, please share it, subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time for a deep dive. This has been Muck You. I'm David Wheeler. Thanks to Colonel Mo Davis for co-hosting today. Our guest has been Colonel Virts from Texas. And please stay informed, stay engaged, and take a moment to look at the bigger picture as Colonel Virts reminded us today. See you next time.
This has been Muck You, co-hosted by Colonel Mo Davis in Asheville, North Carolina, and David Wheeler in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. Thanks to our friend and guest today, Colonel Terry Virts. You can follow Colonel Virts on Blue Sky or X at AstroTerry or TerryVirts.com. Muck You is produced by American Muckrakers, copyright 2025. You can learn more at American